I assume that you're probably familiar with the idea of genre, the term genre, from school or maybe other courses or subjects that you've done. But in case you haven't encountered the word before, genre is simply a French term for describing a particular category of art, culture, cinema, television, literature. So it's simply a term rather, that refers to a way of describing art and culture. But more significantly for us in terms of textual analysis, genre is not just a cataloging device, but it's also a way of explaining how texts relate to each other. And this goes back to our understanding of binary opposition from a couple of weeks ago in many ways. So we know that a Western is a Western because it's not a romantic comedy. Here we know that Love Actually is a rom-com because it doesn't have any resemblance or similarity with the film Cowboys and Aliens. And of course, it is possible to have these types of generic mashups. But in the case of Cowboys and Aliens, it probably wasn't the most successful mashup, if my recollection of the film is correct. So understanding genre is intertextual in nature. It's based on our understanding of other texts. So we know that a rom-com is a rom-com because it's not a Western, but we also can understand simply by looking at the poster that the film Cowboys and Aliens is a hybrid of the Western and the science fiction film through, well, I think the title probably gives it away pretty well here, but, you know, also through the iconography and the imagery in the movie poster there. So genre refers to the textual features of a particular media text and how audiences are expected to relate to that text. In other words, we know that when we go to see a horror film, we're supposed to be frightened. And if we're not frightened, then we're disappointed. We might even, you know, go out of our way and give the film some latitude to frighten us just because we expect that to be part of the generic experience. And knowing a lot about a particular genre, so being a fan of the Avengers or the Marvel Universe, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, whatever, being a fan and having that really detailed, intimate knowledge is very helpful in providing admission into certain communities. So your kind of standing in place within a fan community is governed by how much you know about the genre. And of course, genre is constantly being updated and reworked. So genre is not a static category, rather it's quite dynamic and is always being updated. It's governed by things such as its textual features. So genre is governed by sign choice and the combination of signs into syntagm and paradigm. The technical and institutional features. So we expect when we go to see an action film like The Fate of the Furious, we go there expecting to see lots of dramatic car chases, car stunts, lots of explosions. We expect to see Vin Diesel and The Rock getting into all sorts of physical danger and overcoming that and escaping that. So those technical features will influence how a genre is read and interpreted. And we willingly, as I've said previously, we willingly suspend our belief for some genres. So if you've seen The Fate of the Furious, there are some There are some scenes in that film which are completely ridiculous. They are physically impossible, and of course, special effects these days allow the physically impossible to appear on screen, but some of the stunts, in particular, I'm thinking if you've seen the film The Submarine emerging in the car chase, are just so over the top that if you didn't suspend your belief, it would be a comedy rather than an action and adventure film. Now, again, we can also talk about hybrid genres where the paradigmatic and syntagmatic choices get blended and used in new and innovative ways. So I'm talking here about The Project, I think, as probably one of the most interesting and dramatic examples of that kind of generic hybridization on Australian TV in recent years. So The Project is news, is current affairs, it's chat show, it's comedy, it's kind of all of those things, but it's none of them at the same time. So the whole of The Project is greater than the sum of the generic elements that go into it, and that's an important part of genre blending or genre hybridization. That the whole of this new genre is always greater than the sum of the parts. So, we could watch The Project as a news show, as a current affairs show. It would be quite possible to do that. But, and of course, it's hosted by journalists. It's hosted by Carrie Bickmore, Waleed Ali, and various guest journalists from time to time. But it's also hosted by comedians. So Peter Hellier and other guest comedians appear. So it's news, it's comedy, it's both, it's neither. It's a very complex and interesting kind of mashup of genres. Genre also offers ways of thinking about the world. So for argument's sake, to continue with our example of the news tells us what is important in the world. So whatever is in a newspaper, on a news website, on a news bulletin on TV, that really is telling us these are the important things that happened in the world today. Romance films, whether it be a serious romance or a romantic comedy, the guy usually gets the girl or the girl gets the guy. And it is usually heterosexual in orientation. So it's usually a guy getting a girl or a girl getting a guy. Rarely in mainstream media, mainstream cinema or television, rarely is it a guy getting a guy or a girl getting a girl. Fantasy and science fiction, in those genres, the hero's quest is ultimately successful, even if it takes multiple books and films in the case of Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Twilight as another example. So, even if they get stretched out over a seemingly ridiculous number of episodes, the hero's quest is ultimately successful. In sport, there are winners and there are losers. Police shows, the law is always the pillar of society. Interestingly enough, even if sometimes police officers have to bend the law, stretch the law, break the law in order to achieve their goals. So these social values, whether it be the hero ultimately winning, heterosexual romance being endorsed through romantic comedies, the law being the pillar of society in cop shows, through our repeated exposure to these, those social values become reinforced and again begin to take on the sense that they are in some ways natural, that they are in some ways normal, in some ways common sense. So that idea of how genre normalizes certain ways of looking at the world becomes very important in later weeks when we begin exploring in more detail the ideological impact of all of these textual features that we've been talking about so far.